Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Warming the Bench. It's Bev and Daniela here. Bev, how are you today?
I'm absolutely fine. Well, I am just recovering following the England match, being awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well,
Oh my
originally
goodness.
it was scheduled for 1 o'clock, but then it went back to 2 o'clock. So, yes, I've got a couple of matchsticks underneath my eyes.
You know what? Understandable. And I applaud anyone who was up late watching that game. As we kind of just chatted about right before we jumped on, it was quite the game to be watching. If you were neutral, you probably enjoyed it. Supporters of either side were probably stressed out the whole time, and I feel bad. I'm so sorry, especially for those of you who lost a lot of sleep last night. But what an incredible game. Bev, we hope you get some sleep after this. It'll probably be best for you.
Yes, excuse
Thank
me
you,
if
everyone.
excuse
Yeah,
me
no,
if
you're
I
good.
there's a
You're
few
totally
threads.
good. It's all good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As we discussed last week, we appreciate everyone who's listening in. We hope to have more of you engaging with us, and we're going to have an interesting question at the end of this podcast that will hopefully have you engaging with us a little bit more. But as we kind of talked about in the last episode, when we covered some historic contracts and transfers and what that all meant. This was going to be kind of a three-parter. And this week, we're going to be speaking a little bit about athletes and the conversation around them being viewed as commodities and whether that's a fair conversation and whether there's a balance to be had here on this topic. It's an interesting one, Bev. I think we kind of touched on this. This took a little bit of thought, and we needed to be a little bit careful with how we have this conversation. But I feel like we might be having quite an interesting chat ahead. What do you say?
Yes, I did really need to put a lot of thought into this one, Dan. I almost feel that I need another 5 days to consider it. I mean, the topic is commodities, people, or both. So if we
Mhm,
look at the game expanding at unprecedented speed, and that's partly driven by the
mhm,
players. We've got so many women players with big personalities, very dynamic personalities across the globe. Would you agree,
mhm,
Dan? There's, Patelis, there's Leah Williamson, there's Trinity Rodman, there's Alessia Russo.
mhm.
We could go on and on and on listing them. Um,
Yeah.
when I first come across the Lionesses in 2022, very quickly after, their Euros win, I did wonder what the situation would look like a couple of years down the line, because prior
Mhm,
to this, Jill Scott said we'd be in World Cups, we'd be in the Euros, we'd get on a plane, we might be semi-finalist or whatever was the achievement, and we'd come back and not one reporter was waiting for us. So all that
mhm,
training, all that effort and hard work, all that emotional management that they had to do, and emotional investment and physicality that they put into the game, nobody was there to
mhm.
applaud them or celebrate their achievements and what winning the
Yeah.
Euros would look like for them. And one of the things that I came away with, Dan, was that I didn't, I really didn't want anything to spoil what that game looked like in 2022 for me personally. But I
Mhm,
knew that the commodification would come into it some way in order for the game to grow. But the
mhm,
tension that I've got in my mind, and it exists in reality, is that human beings spoil things. So we take
mhm.
something and it's quite beautiful, and we admire it and we pick
Yeah.
it up and we look at it, and then we put it back, and it goes back in a tainted way. It never goes back in
Yeah.
the way that it was initially plucked, if you like. It never goes back that way. So
Mhm,
with the unprecedented growth and players driving the growth, you're increasingly caught between Them being recognised as people with rights and needs and interior lives and being
Mhm.
treated more and more as commodities. So there's value that's measured by marketing, revenue, generation of brand alignment, etc. And I think now there is that tension, especially with the
Mhm.
way that the WSL is going this year, with Michelle Kang buying all these wonderful players. And we ourselves, we've described it as products, haven't we? A product, a project.
Yeah.
And and I feel
Mhm.
almost like berating myself for calling it that, assigning it that. But it's true, Dan. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think again, it's an interesting conversation because we're both aware of the fact that the game has so much visibility now. And with visibility comes increased economic value, right? And it
Mm,
is a business at the end of the day. As much as we do not like to admit it, it's a
mm,
business. And what I find interesting about the way we chat about the women's game, by we, I just mean the collective we, is there's a little bit of hesitation to completely go there, but there is almost a disservice by not acknowledging what's happening, and that commercialization and over commodification, as you said, about players and what the sport is starting to look like. Because I think the longer that we don't acknowledge it, the worse it's going to become. And with everything that drives economic value, you're going to have to look at it from a financial perspective, from a business perspective. And where I think the women's game is right now is there is an opportunity to have it not go so far down the side of this is completely a business and we just speak of people like they're objects and things, but we're not even halfway there yet. And I know that sounds crazy because we're having this conversation, but there is a slight hesitation, excuse me, to speak about money and finances and what that all looks like, probably because it's never been properly funded and resourced and all of these things. But the reality is that there is some money coming into the game. There are athletes who are taking their image and their brand into their own hands. They're very marketable, and brands and clubs and leagues are starting to pick up on that and using that to their advantage, which we know that they will, and we know that that's a normal thing. But what I find is, like I said, the disservice is the unwillingness to do that, even though we all kind of know it. It's almost like that open secret, like we all know about it, but we just don't talk about it too much. And that's not the best way to approach this conversation, because I think that there is a appropriate way to have it, an appropriate way to acknowledge both without losing the human aspect of it, which is very important as well, because there's a lot of context to why we can't just treat female athletes like projects or like commodities or like objects. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but just in terms of being part of a business. But yeah, I think we're in this weird space of do we, don't we? Everyone kind of knows that no one really wants to have a full conversation about it because it's still in this growth era. But I think both can coexist.
yeah, that's very interesting. I think, to be honest with you, I know the men's game that they get paid extremely well. They do. We're talking millions and millions and millions
Hmm.
per player, multi-millions. And
Yes.
they've also got the
Hmm.
infrastructure to go there. And very often the women's game is kind of compromise to the extent of the men's game going
Hmm.
forward. But I still think we can look at the men's game and say, oh, we don't need to go there, but we can grab this.
Hmm.
And I think this is an opportune time and what can I say? An optimum time to explore.
Hmm.
Now, listening to Michelle
Hmm.
Kang, she said, you don't have to choose the model that I'm applying to London City Lionesses. There can be lots of
Hmm.
models that you business models that you can apply to the WSL, WSL2, and through the tiers in the UK, because obviously it's a pyramid and closed system in
Hmm.
Canada. And I agree with what she's saying there, because if you look at Durham, they have been
Hmm.
saved, and that was a community effort there. that somebody from the community, a business person, has swept in there
Mhm.
and they have taken them forward. So that's a different model
Mhm.
there, isn't it? So I think
Yep.
in terms of the business side, there is great opportunity to just look at the different models going forward. What are your views?
Yeah. I mean, Michelle's right. There's different ways to do things. For sure. I think we probably should chat a little bit about how okay, so certain models, if you're looking at like a traditional model, like a traditional European model, for example, right? A lot of the way those models are set up, the pyramid and all of the above, that has if we want to look at how it looks like in the men's game, right, for a minute, that has led to a lot of that commercialization and commodity kind of shaping of male athletes. And because you just mentioned um, we can take things that we don't like out and pick the ones that we do like. A lot of people like the traditional models. They like the pyramids. They like the promotion relegation. It's important to the game. 100%. Nothing about that is wrong. I think if we look at where it went wrong on that end and look at how the women's game is going, what is fascinating to see is do they when I mean the powers that be, people who are involved in the game and involved in making decisions, do they want to run directly the same way, or do they want to do what you were saying is cherry pick certain things that make sense? Because that's going to tell us how this conversation that we're having, how this continues to shape, right? So if you want to run exactly the same way, then I don't think we're far off from speaking of players completely like commodities. And if the models change, or if they adopt a Michelle Kang type of model, you still have that fear because it's a lot of money flowing in. But there's also an opportunity there if you're an independent investor or whatever it might be, or community like Durham, to say, hang on a minute, we don't necessarily agree with this, and we're going to shape our club this way, which you see a little bit in the NWSL because they're more independent owners, or they're all independent owners, I should say. There's a lot of clubs who are not willing to go in the direction of we're going to treat this 100% like a business. And you can tell by some of their strategies. Now, some of their strategies don't really work because it is not properly resourcing things, and that's a whole nother, separate conversation. But you can see the difference in them. And I think the traditional model is the pathway that would probably lead to this becoming more accelerated. And I think the Michelle Kang model, as weird as it might sound, because you can make up almost your own way of doing things, is where you have the ability, a little bit more flexibility to say, this is how we want to be, and this is what we're going to use. And we're going to use maybe different ideas and so forth to build this. And then perhaps that um, how athletes are treated and how they're viewed is going to take a little bit of a different way, even though at some point we will have probably a longer discussion about it's probably going in a similar direction, but not at the accelerated rate that we have seen in other sports previously.
What I like about Kang's model, because it looks to me as though she's going, pay the player, pay the player, think
Hmm.
about the player,
Hmm.
pay the player a good salary so that she can bring in the
Yeah.
best. And that's very visible
Hmm.
now, isn't it? With Alexia Putellas coming on board, Mary Earps is another big
Hmm.
name, and so on. But what I like
Hmm.
about Kang's model is that she's considered the entire picture. I think she's taken a holistic approach because she's also
Hmm.
considering the infrastructure. She is
Yes.
considering the athlete's physicality, physiology, psychology with, sports psychologist, the nutritional
Hmm.
aspect of it, fantastic training. So therefore, and health and safety, etc., and looking at the arena in which they play and the
Hmm.
fans, bringing on board the fans,
Yeah.
concession rates. So for me, that's a holistic approach, but putting the
Hmm.
player first with a good salary. So that's
Hmm.
one.
Yeah.
And I like that approach. I don't think that was ever a consideration when you think about the men's game.
Mm-mm. No, because athletes like the and I think women's football is in this kind of arena too, where it is growing very rapidly. Obviously, men's sports grew very rapidly, and just in general, we can that can be looked at upon outside of football, but specifically to football, it became so profitable so quickly, and so large so quickly that they had to almost pivot really in a very rapid way to say, okay, well, these people are now marketable to us. These people are the face of our clubs, of our league, whatever it might be. And how do we maximize that potential? And how do we continue this economic beast that we've now created? Right. And women's football, of course, we've spoken about it. It's not as profitable. It's getting there, but it's definitely taking some time. So we're not totally in that space yet. But what you're saying about Michelle King is she's acknowledging, okay, listen, we're not in a completely profitable industry right now, but it's going to be. And when we finally get there, I will have created this sort of club and this space that allows that economic side to prosper, but also it does not sacrifice the individual as well. So she kind of, I think she's trying to strike a balance between the two, and perhaps providing a bit of a blueprint saying you can do this as well if the care and the attention is given to both without one or the other giving, right? Because you're not going to sacrifice the person, but you also need to acknowledge that you're also running a business. And I think that's where we kind of come central into this conversation. It's like that balance needs to happen between the two in order for everything to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've mentioned before in the past, haven't we, that it's like a scales, and we're trying to keep that
Hmm.
balance, that central point, that balance. And for me,
Hmm.
this is an opportune time in which to try to define what that balance looks like, Dan,
Hmm.
in order,
Completely.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, yeah, yeah. You know what I was going to say? I think we should speak a little bit about how this kind of conversation came to be. I think we touched just very briefly on it. But why are we now having this conversation? Like, what's kind of driving this discussion about how players are being viewed or how they're being treated? And just a few things that I wanted to note down. We keep talking about it, but visibility, right? There's so many eyes on women's football right now. Um, so because of that, fees like transfer fees are increasing, salaries are increasing. We've spoke about last week some big salaries, and we've people big names coming into certain clubs. Um, and because of a lot of these things and all these eyes and so forth, a lot of players are becoming their own global brands, right? Like we look at Leah Williamson. Okay, Alexia is a huge brand in and of herself. In previous, it was a lot less than it is now. I think the ones we kind of noted down, like Alex Morgan and Megan Rapinoe, in a little bit different ways, but they were not. They were kind of the standouts of their time. Versus now, it's a lot more common for players to kind of have their own brands and be the face of their own brands. And this is a really important part because when you try to create a brand, everything kind of goes into that, right? So the player's performance, their overall image, sometimes even their personal lives become marketable for people, right? Like I'm, an example I kind of noted down for this. So last week, Gotham FC in the United States announced the signing of Sam Kerr, right? Sam is married to Christy Mewis. Christy used to play for Gotham, and she was there at the signing. Their son was there, and it's not that this is a bad thing. I mean, it can definitely get a little bit tricky sometimes, but there's a lot of marketability around the fact that she's married to a fellow, or maybe now former soccer player, football player, excuse me. They have this beautiful child together. There's so much of that personal life that can also be marketed into this entire image that makes a signing like that, for example, such a big draw for a club and such a big draw for fans to go look at and say these are recognizable faces, and that becomes part of that brand, right? And that's when you're branding yourself, that becomes a little bit involved in the conversation of, ooh, this player is starting to look a little bit more like a commodity, excuse me, because it's not just the player in and of themselves. There's all these other aspects that go along with it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. What you're mentioning there is a media narrative.
Hmm.
I think, which can be
Hmm.
quite problematic because it's stick on
Yeah.
Sam Kerr for the time being, and that
Hmm.
this is just the point of view, but
Hmm.
Sam has taken her partner Kirsty to
Hmm.
Gotham, which is where she used to play, and they've got their son Jagger, and that's a
Hmm.
typical. It's a family. Can I just say it's a family arrangement, and not everybody now are in
Hmm.
families.
Hmm.
In fact, we're going the other
No.
way. There's almost like over
Hmm.
50% of the population, certainly over here, and I think it is in parts
Hmm.
of America, where they are
Yeah.
single people. But it's almost like
Yes.
push into that tradition, be married,
Hmm.
have a child. It's like a linear approach. So it's
Hmm.
almost going back into that, well, you're a round hole in a round peg sort of thing.
Hmm.
And it's also the role model trap that you're expected to embody all these morals and all this goodness. And that's where it
Hmm.
starts to flatten you as a player
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
terms of
And yeah,
commodification.
but yeah, and unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how we're looking at it, a lot of these things though become very marketable and they become almost like assets, right? So
Yeah,
a lot of clubs will be attracted to the fact that they can sign players who are part of a very famous couple. I think it's a little different, and I'm not going to say a little different. I'm going to say a lot different. In women's football, a lot of the times you are looking at gay couples, so that obviously that traditional aspect is not completely there, like the traditional aspect of marriage and having a child, and sure, that's in and of itself, it's a little different in the women's football space, but clubs will definitely latch on to the fact that they might have that as a draw for fans, right? Because a lot of fans become invested in people's personal lives. That's not unusual in anywhere across sports, by the way, because that happens in all arenas of sport, male or female, for sure.
yeah.
But that's something that becomes a marketability factor for them, right? Like you want this player to be someone people can recognize for a lot of different reasons. It might not even be their sporting ability. It might say, "Oh, that's so and so is married to that person or is dating that person," and that becomes a way you hook people, right? So all of these things become assets to them, and all these things are things that they can market because it works out in their favor when you have the ability for your fan base to relate maybe somehow, or be able to recognize certain things that attract them to your club, and then that creates obviously economic potential too.
Well, that could be beautifully coiffed by Sam and Kirsty, couldn't it? Almost.
Hmm.
We talked about empowerment of uh, players that now
Hmm.
they take their branding under their own wing
Mm.
and they guide it in the way that
Yes.
they want it to go. And let's face it,
Hmm.
Sam may not have many years left playing. So why not get
Correct.
as much money as she possibly can for her family?
Hmm.
Why not?
It's true. Yeah, it's true. And, in the way that the clubs can use that to their advantage, players can use their marketability to their advantage, as you just said, right?
Mhm,
And neither one of them has to be negative. I think in a player's perspective, it's probably a little bit more genuine because they're looking out for themselves, and
mm.
clubs, because they operate as businesses, that's where you can get a little bit tricky and you can get some
That's
maybe
it.
disingenuous
Mm,
attitudes, right,
mm,
towards people.
mm.
But because now there is that two-way street almost, there is that agency, like you said, to take, okay, you're going to view me as a commodity, that's fine, but I'm going to use it to my advantage as well,
Yes.
which people are doing. I mean, Trinity Rodman's another one. Okay, you
Mm,
want to treat me as this massive figure in the league, that's fine, but now you're going to have to pay me because you're using my image to promote the NWSL, to promote what this league looks like, to promote the face of US football, right? It can kind of go both ways. Obviously, like I said, one's a little bit more genuine than the other, but it works out. And now we're in an era where they can do that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Let's look at another one. Leah Williamson. Now, when I look at her,
Hmm.
I see that she's very dynamic. I've watched
Hmm.
documentary of her actually speaking at Oxford University about football. And I think actually she
Hmm.
gave up a place at Oxford, if I remember rightly. She gave up a place at Oxford in order to she wanted to invest in a charity. I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
it oh God, it was the guy. Yeah, it was. I can't go into it now, but I can't remember it. I'm sorry, 2 o'clock is too much for me. Um, it's- it was it she invested in a charity and she gave up that route of academia, but you can tell that she is a
Hmm.
very intelligent woman. But she also models for Burberry.
Hmm.
She's also an activist, isn't she? She highlights the challenges of being a gay woman, and but she's very much, well, I'm pro individual choice. If a woman
Hmm.
wishes to go out, that's fine, but I understand there are challenges associated with that. So when I look at her, she's an incredibly dynamic woman, incredibly dynamic.
Hmm.
And I don't see her as being flattened or commodified at all. I see her very much in control. What do you reckon, Dan?
You know what? I think it's going to be a rare time that we disagree. I see her very, I don't want, maybe not necessarily commodificated, but I think she's very marketable, and Arsenal and England use it to their advantage. Um, and I don't mean that in a negative way, by the way, like do your thing. I think when you think of Arsenal, one of the first people you'll probably think of is Leah. Now, that's
Yeah,
for a lot of reasons. She's obviously a childhood gunner, so she's been there for since she was 7 years old or whatever it was, 8 years old. But you'll notice in a lot of their marketing and a lot of their things, she's front and center constantly because she is a very beautiful woman. That helps. We know that pretty sells,
yeah,
unfortunately, as much as we don't like to admit it, but it's true, right?
mm,
It's nice to see a good-looking person, objectively good-looking. It hooks people. Same thing for England. She's the England captain. Again, fans have become a little bit invested in her personal life, so that has worked maybe from her side in the sense of maybe people having eyes on her, brand deals, all of that kind of stuff. Not that I'm saying she wants that, but it's just a reality of being a kind of in the spotlight. Um, and there might be a risk that that could become something that is used against her in a lot of ways too. Much out of her own control, because if the club is realizing this opportunity to continue putting this person as the face of their club and all that, that again, those economic opportunities will always be there. And it's like, where do you draw the line? Is Leah comfortable with all of these things? Does she feel like she has to go along with it because she's been with Arsenal for so long? Is she consistently being propped out as the face of English football at the national team level, even when she's maybe been injured, like all of these sort of things. So there's potential of disingenuous behavior there as well on both sides. But I definitely think that she's someone who is very, very marketable, and she's definitely used it for her own brand as well, which totally fair.
yeah, I totally agree with you. I did remember that she said following the Euros that she wanted to be grounded, that she got on the phone to her friends and
Hmm.
family, say, hey, meet me down a pub in an hour's time and we'll go off on a bender. Because she said, my,
I love
li-
that.
my life from when I was a child until now, even through, with the Euros wins and all that has brought with it, she's still very much grounded.
Hmm.
She said her life has hardly changed in that respect, that she
Yeah,
has everybody
which is great.
with her from childhood. Friends and family are still there. So she has that continuity. She
Hmm.
has those anchors. But what I wanted to ask you, Dan, going back to Sam,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
when something, because their bodies are their commodity, that's the product, the
Hmm.
bodies, because with the
Hmm.
body
Yeah.
comes the footballing skills, whether you're a
Yep.
striker, or you're a great winger, or you're central
Hmm.
defender, or you're a holding midfielder, whatever position you play, your body and your
Hmm.
respective skills are
Yep.
your marketability. But what
Hmm.
happens, in your opinion, when Sam Kerr was out
Hmm.
with a long, ACL injury? How do you feel that
Hmm.
impacted her journey in Chelsea?
It didn't help.
As
I
you were
think
saying, yeah.
everyone could see when she came back. Yeah, it didn't help when she came back. She was, and this is part of why she left, limited in her playing time. A lot of doubts. I mean, doubts will happen with every player, whether they have the ability to come back and be the way that they were previously. And she mentioned that she was on an interview recently with her sister-in-law actually, and kind of spoke about that. And from a brand perspective, maybe didn't personal her personal brand probably didn't wasn't harmed, but from a Chelsea perspective, there definitely looks like there was an attempt to maybe push her out a little bit, maybe not believing that she could be the player that once was for Chelsea, because you don't know. The reality is you don't know how players are going to come back from injuries, right? Unfortunately, it's a trial and error. Trial it out. Are they going to be able to get back to their form? Um, and from the club perspective, that harmed them, right? Because Sam was their marquee signing. She was a striker. You know, the backflips, like all the crazy things that she does or did in previous, it's like, oh, is this going to be there? Is this
Mm.
character, this personality that we have, is that going to still be there? And when that is in doubt, there's a desire to look at, okay, well, if that's not going to be there, what else do we have in the locker, or what else can we bring to the locker room that's going to fill the gap of that? So you look at, they went out, Chelsea went out and bought Myra Ramirez 3 weeks after Sam Kerr did her ACL, because they needed someone immediately to fill this big personality like gap. I don't think it's done that, but that's what they tried to do. You bring in Alyssa Thompson, a face of the U.S. women's national team. There's so many different things. They have to plug some holes now because that player is no longer physically available to them, and the physical availability affects the marketable availability, right? So there's a lot of different things, and I don't think it helps. I think Alexia Putellas is another one. As much as crazy as that might sound, when she was injured for Barcelona, she was injured for a same amount of time as Sam, just broken up. For those who don't remember, she did her ACL, came back, and then had to have another surgery and was out for another 5, 6 months, whatever it was. So that definitely hurt their brand. And there's been conversations since she came back from that injury. Is she the same player? Does she have that same marketability factor? I think personally she does. It's a little different than Sam, in my opinion. But yeah, it definitely hurts the club and it hurts the person, the player themselves, because um, when their club is no longer kind of in that same space of them when it comes to how they can market them, you're at a bit of a crossroads in that regard.
Well, yeah, keeping with Sam, One Team, One Dream documentary. At that time,
Hmm.
that was around about COVID, wasn't it? 2019,
Yes.
November.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then into
Hmm.
2020. At that time, she was great. She was everything that Chelsea were looking for in terms of
Hmm.
global recognition, improving their profile
Hmm.
within the WSL, and proving that they could actually go on
Yeah.
to win trophies. She brought all
Hmm.
her demographics with her fans. And so everything was
Hmm.
in her favour. That is why she was brought on board for that period. But then this is
Yeah.
constantly shifting. And I mean, any sport, Dan, any sport is constantly
Anything.
shifting overnight, isn't it?
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
have a
Yep.
team or a club that can be in favour one day, but out of favour the next.
Hmm.
That's how it works. And her time is
Yep.
gone, I feel. Her time is gone,
Hmm.
and along has come Bompastor, and quite rightly
Hmm.
so. Bompastor wants to take it forward in her own way. That's why she's managing Chelsea now, because Emma Hayes is
Yep.
moved on. She's gone to the USA. So I think Sam
Hmm.
has done her time.
Hmm.
Is that a little bit
Hmm.
brutal, or am I right?
I I No, no. I mean, I think she's maybe done her time in the WSL.
Yeah.
I think when you're looking at the market of the NWSL, it's a little different. There's a little bit more of a willingness to bring in players who are maybe a little bit on the older side. And I struggle to say that because Sam, in society view, is not old. In football view, might be. Um,
Mm.
but they're a little bit more willing, and I think with the contract that they gave her, for example, till 2030, it's very clearly that they believe that she's going to be the face of one of the faces of Gotham.
Mm.
Um, so I think maybe in the WSL, yes, in European football, yes, I think there's a little difference in how they look at players, and this is maybe part of it. Look at players as commodities, or look at them at their marketability, and maybe at a certain age they're like, it's not for us anymore. Versus the NWSL is different. So there's some interesting maybe sociological insights into that. I don't know what they are, but I'm sure that someone can tell us. Um,
Mm.
but I think for the NWSL, she's going to be great because she was once a star of the NWSL and still holds a record there actually, which is quite interesting, and maybe a conversation for another day. But in terms of European, yes, I think the time came and went, and unfortunately, that ACL injury was a huge part of it, as happens with a lot of players. I mean, look at in France. The French league is not very well developed in any way, but I would think of like Ada Hegerberg, for example, first Ballon d'Or winner. So that right in and of itself should tell you what type of a player she was. At her peak, does her ACL, is out for 18 months and has not really been the same marketing factor for Lyon since. Right, they've had to fill those gaps with other players. Um, I think like Viviane Miedema, same thing. As much as she's come back decently well from injuries and unfortunately had to have surgery again recently, again at her peak, could have probably extended that marketing factor, but those injuries will just kill you in a lot of ways, and I don't mean that in a literal sense, but just in a sometimes career defining sense. And unfortunately the clubs have to adapt to that as well because they have to look out for certain things on their side of it also.
Well, I think it also exposes the poor infrastructure within the women's game in comparison to the men's, in that we still don't know
Hmm.
conclusively what is the
Hmm.
cause of the ACLs. It could be periods and the menstrual cycle. It can be the state of the pitches. It could be their footwear and their actual sporting wear that they actually. It could be a myriad of
All of it.
different things, all of the
Yeah.
above. It could be all of those things. So
Yeah.
that doesn't help. And I think
Hmm.
then is when you see the true difference, start to see these differences between the men in the women's game, and the lack of
Hmm.
time span and the lack of investment over the years. But with Sam, I think the
Hmm.
leverage that she has, and that she's still able to speak and people listen, the leverage is that she's
Hmm.
still part of the Matildas. And she is like Leah
Yes.
Williamson is to England, that she is the
Mm.
face of the Matilda.
Yes.
So she still has that power behind her. Are there any more
Hmm.
players that you would like to bring? I'd like to bring up Alex Morgan, because she was of a different generation, wasn't she, Dan?
Mm.
I'd like to bring that
Yeah.
one up.
Alex Morgan was,
Yeah.
yeah, probably the face of US soccer. We'll give them the
Mm.
right word for their organization for a long time, and for so many reasons, and most of which were probably not because people um, acknowledged how good of a player she actually was. I think when a lot of people think of Alex Morgan, they'll think of she was on a lot of campaigns. She was, a soccer moment, and I do apologize, but the moment where she did the sipping of the tea celebration when they beat
Mm.
England in 2019. There were so many things because she became kind of a brand. She became a personality, right? And this is maybe the danger of players being treated as more commodities or more as brands, is that sometimes it does detract from the fact that they are fantastic players. Because Alex Morgan definitely has not gotten the recognition that she deserves for how good she was.
Yeah. And another one is Rapinoe, isn't it? Ellen Rapinoe. She
Yes.
was quite an
Yeah.
activist. Could you tell us a little bit more about her?
Hmm. Yeah. Megan Rapinoe is actually an interesting one because she's probably the opposite of Alex Morgan in terms of brand. She's got a very specific brand. It's very heavy on activism, very heavy on doing the right thing. And that divided a lot of people in the US, specifically in the US football space, because she said a lot of things that people didn't want to hear in terms
Yeah.
of how people are treated and how things need to change. And maybe the US has a bad history of treatment of indigenous people, of people of color, as most of our countries that we live in do. And Megan is someone who's very polarizing, but I think her polarization also worked to her advantage because that helped her build a brand in her own right, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, I do. But they were of a
Hmm.
different generation. Another one that I've heard come up is
Yeah.
Marta. Marta, how do you think that
Mm,
she was treated in
yeah.
terms of commodification? Or do you think that she still very much presents herself as a person in her own right, which she is, of course?
I think yeah, I think person in her own right, because they were of different generations, and I think Marta's a little different from the US players because the US has always kind of been front and center. Marta, I think if Marta was 30 years old now, she would probably be the most marketable football player on the planet because she's probably the best to have ever played the game. Um, but because she's of a different generation, that ability to market her a lot was not there, and that ability to become part of this global conversation of commodities and so forth with players was not really available to her. So she's of that different generation where she's at probably the very tail end of her career now, and that she missed the boat on that a little bit. But I think if she was even honestly, even like 5, 6 years younger, we would be speaking about Marta in the way that we speak of Trinity Rodman, of Sam Kerr, of Leah Williamson, because just those things were not available to women's football. The visibility wasn't as high, but Marta is Marta, and I think in terms of just her overall global brand, people probably know exactly who she is.
I get the feeling it will be retrospective for Marta. You know how
Mm,
good she
later
was will
on,
all
yeah,
be when she retires and whatever she
yeah,
decides to do, it will be retrospective.
hmm,
I think
hmm,
people there are
yeah. It's
many
going to be
other
one of
yeah, many other players look at her and
yeah,
think, "Oh my God, she was one of the best. She's fantastic."
so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think and there's so many, there's a couple of those players that again they're of that age where they miss that boat. I mean, I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but I'm going to talk about Christine Sinclair for a minute.
Mm.
The most international goals of any player, male or female, and most people probably don't know how good she was. And because, she's now 41, I think 40, 41, 42, something like that. So again, she's in that Marta generation of players where, women's football just wasn't visible. So nobody really knew. But if Sinky was 30 now, performing at the rate that she performed when she was 30 years old, she would be up in the conversation of Ballon d'Or every year and like all these sorts of things, right? But it's an interesting that generational divide and how different it is for players who are maybe 25, 30 now versus the generation of Marta, of Christine, of some of the England players, Farrah Williams, all of these people who were fantastic, but maybe we're not in an era where that commercialization of them and that branding of them was available because the visibility wasn't there.
You mentioned Ballon d'Or, and immediately I thought of Bonmati, Atana Bonmati.
Yeah, yeah.
She, she's almost along with
She's the face of it.
Alexia, face of the Ballon d'Or,
Yeah,
isn't she?
face
Yeah. But just to kind of
completely.
start to round things off now, um,
Hmm.
she, I mean, she is just iconic, isn't she? I think she will probably see out her
Hmm.
days in Barcelona. I'm not sure what you think, but it seems that way because she's made a legacy
Yeah,
for herself, hasn't she, in terms of the history that she's invested in that actual club in
yeah,
Barcelona.
yeah.
Um,
Barring any weird financial things, I think she'll probably stay there.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. But I mean, you can see her
Yeah,
kind of branching out already, can't you? Because she's been in America and she's been
yeah.
broadcasting, she's doing
Punditry.
some punditry.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely
it's great.
fantastic. And you can see
Have you?
again. sorry, the
Yeah.
things are moving on.
No, no.
It's not just about player opportunity now, but moving into
Yeah.
punditry and possibly coaching and managing. Those other avenues are
Mm.
beginning to open up. And I think that's partly about the person and the character, and
Hmm.
partly about commodification as well. So I think we see those two things,
Yeah.
only my opinion, happening in tandem, that there are certain players are kind of,
Hmm.
getting these opportunities when they finish. But what bothers me here is the disparity between those elite football players, women's
Mm.
football players,
And
and
the others.
grassroots, Dan,
Hmm.
because there is a
Yeah.
disparity within a disparity here, isn't there?
A huge one. Yeah. There's a complete divide, gap, I should say. And and to a degree that exists in all sports. But
Mm,
because we're talking about women's sports and specifically women's football being kind of where it is, you see that gap, and that gap, unfortunately, I think as it rapidly grows, is just going to become bigger, unless
mm.
that those resources and that investment filters through every layer of it. Um, and that's not just in one country or another. It's very common in a lot of places, right? And you will start to see a larger gap, I think, as we continue to go forward. Unfortunately, like I said, unless there's some different changes that are coming to ensure that that gap doesn't get massive, that you can't start to bridge it.
But it kind of takes us like a full circle conversation in terms of how we started
Hmm.
with business models in Cannes, etc., and Durham, which was it's been a different
Hmm.
approach. In that I do see, and this, again, it's only opinion. Please disagree
Hmm.
with me if you like, people out there, listeners. Please disagree. We want your engagement. Me and Dan agree too far too much. um, is that I think you're going to see a number of more grassroots, or maybe second or third tier clubs go to the wall, and you may
Hmm.
see some come back, like Reading, for instance, they've come back into the
Yeah.
mix. But I think what you'll
Hmm.
find, and this is what's good about where we are now, it's optimal, for
Hmm.
creativity to come into it, Dan. So if you've got some
Yeah.
creative business people out there, how they might look at some of
Hmm.
these women's team and invest in them in a creative way.
Completely. Completely. There's opportunities. I think anyone who is a business person but has a sense of, like you said, that creative knack for something can look at anything and say, "Ooh, I like this, and I like this," and they could be all three separate things and say, "I want to blend them all together." Why not? You have the opportunity to do
Absolutely.
that. It can be a blank slate for a lot of people, right?
Well,
It can be a
we're
blank
talking
slate.
about people in commodities. Somebody, like a filmmaker,
Hmm.
for example, might look at Durham and think,
Hmm.
oh, proper underdog. Oh, we must make a little film about
Hmm.
this because everybody
Yeah,
loves the
and that could be.
underdog. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
And that could be a
and
launching pad for them too, right?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there comes
I
the
wanted to touch on something.
investment. Go on, Dan.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to touch on something very briefly, because I think it was important and it came up in my notes. A lot of the times we speak about, when we're talking about, marketability and brands and all that sort of thing. And I think there's been a little bit of a conversation in the last few years, maybe speaking to and I think we touched on it last week as well when we were speaking about Bunny Shaw, maybe a little bit more of like a Eurocentric take on a lot of this.
Mm,
And traditionally, players who've been very marketable have been, very pretty, mostly white players, like, and so forth. But I think it's worth noting that, when Bunny signs that big contract, when Trinity signs that big contract, that shows how marketable and how brandable players who are not the traditional, what you
mm,
would think of a traditional brand, could be, and how important they are to clubs and to branding as well. And I think clubs are starting to see that, oh, we don't need to look all the same because there's going to be so much opportunity here. And again, that opportunity works on both sides, right?
mm.
Trinity and Bunny, for example, can look at and say, oh, I'm the first to do this, but now the person next to me can be up right up there with your likes of Leah and Alex Morgan and those people, even though they don't look exactly the same. And it shifts that conversation a little bit outside of that Euro kind of centric mindset to football and say, oh yeah, there's a ton of players all over the world who could be extremely marketable to us and marketable for themselves if given and provided the right opportunity and spaces to be able to do so.
Well, now that we're having a conversation, or just the fact that we're having a conversation about women's football
Hmm.
tells me there's been a shift in society and
Hmm.
across the world. That there
Yeah,
are other. See, the thing
exactly.
is, on social media, we are able to see that there are people that are marginalized. In fact, maybe marginalized now is the norm. That
Hmm.
often spoke to so many people that have said, well, I've never felt that I fitted in society. Well, I've always felt marginalized.
Yeah.
I've never been wanted to be part of the crowd. I can't be part of the crowd because I'm an introvert, and on and on and on. And every one of these
Hmm.
players has a backstory. So there's
Yeah.
marketability in each and every one of them if the branders, the marketers put their creative hat on.
Exactly. Exactly. And it benefits both, right?
Mm,
And again, obviously there will be some disingenuous people out there who will just look out for the bottom dollar. But I think brands are starting to also realize there's so much opportunity. And in their opportunity, players realize, oh, there's opportunity here for me. And I'm going to be able to have that agency to say, all right, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to help this, do this. But in
mm,
the same stretch, this is what you're going to give me. This is what I'm going to gain. And this is how I'm going to market myself as
mm,
the face of this, whether it's a club, whether it's uh, a deal of some product or whatever it is that they could be involved in, the Nikes, the Adidas, all this kind of stuff, right? It
mm.
kind of is a changing tide. And the only issue is when it becomes completely about the commodity and the product without factoring in that there's so many different layers that come along with it, as we've discussed in this podcast.
I totally agree with you, Dan. I mean, now, I can look on social medias and I can see women amputees and men amputees playing football.
Yeah,
Yeah. And,
incredible,
I see
incredible.
televisation of the under 17s and the under 19s and the under
Hmm.
23s. And you can follow the development of those young women. Do you know what I mean? And the young girls that may be
Exactly.
10 and under can look at that and aspire. So everything is changing. Everything is changing.
Hmm. And in those ways, those individuals, maybe who like the under 17s or players with disabilities, you have the deaf and blind players who are playing now too, or
Mm,
vision impaired, some sort of vision impairment. Those are ways in which people can become commodities in a non-negative way, because now
yes.
they're doing something that we probably never would have thought would be on TV, or we never would have thought would be something that people would engage with.
Mm, yeah, I totally agree with you. What was the question that we were going to
Me too.
pose?
The question is, okay, so we've spoken about commodities and people and athletes. And I think we had an interesting conversation that there needs to be a balance. But where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line? Is it too much? Are we already in the too much? Where's that line? We'd love to hear from you. Where do we draw the line here? Does it make
Yeah.
sense to keep going the rate that we're going? So please tell us, where do we draw the line? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Bev. We appreciate all of you listening. And we're going to be back next week for kind of a part three of this one. We're going to speak about how do we protect players a little bit, because there's some organizations, unions, and stuff that do that. And we're going to get into that next week, right, Bev?
We certainly are. Absolutely. Please tune in
Abs- yes,
with your
please tune in.
answers
Thank you
to the
so much. And
question. With your answers to the
yes, tune in
question
with
that
your
Dan
answers to
has
the
just
question.
posed. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
If not,
Yes.
we'll put you on
Well,
the
Bev,
naughty
I hope you
list.
get some. Yes, we are. We're going to give it to Santa Claus at the end of the year. This is the naughty list, okay? So please pay attention. Bev, I hope you get some sleep tonight or
Thank you.
soon, because it sounds like maybe you might need it. And I hope everyone's been enjoying their summer so far.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. See ya.
Bye.